All right, let's see how things are this morning. Good morning, everybody. It seems to be Wednesday, the 18th, which is bad enough. I hope you are all awake or still awake and whatever, and we can try to be somewhat productive. I know I'm bad at it. Yes, seems to work. Good morning. So let's see how much we can do. I'm still sort of struggling with all kinds of stuff when it comes to productivity, but maybe I'll actually get shit done today. Who knows? Wouldn't that be something? I did try to continue work on the Mormon video yesterday, but I think I need to change my way of recording stuff. And that's what I'm going to try today. I also reread large parts of The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and yeah, I don't think it's a good book. In fact, I feel like Elantris is maybe better than Mistborn. Probably a bit of a hot take there, but since I don't know anything about Brandon Sanderson stuff, I feel that maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. Somehow, I'm also, I mean, when I read like Wheel of Time years ago, I also thought that the books that some people call the slump were actually better than some of the other books, so that lots of people liked. So maybe I'm just weird. Hey, how you doing, Britain? Over there. How much time difference is there? How much difference in time zone is there between Florida and Oklahoma? If I may ask. Yeah, as I said, like I'm almost done with the first Mistborn novel, and there's some things I found interesting. I don't know what to do with that. I guess it's not worth mentioning that in like an entire video or anything of the sorts, but something I've noticed with both Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan is not so much about the writing, although obviously I have plenty of opinions there, but something I find interesting is in the way they market books or talk about books. Because when you look at Mistborn on the back cover says, "What if the Dark Lord has won?" Which, sounds like a really cool premise. And then you start reading the book, and it's like, yeah, the Lord Ruler rules in this empire. He's just got an empire. He does not rule the entire planet. If you go back and, read Lord of the Rings, that's exactly what happened with Sauron. Like, Sauron has won. Sauron owns Mordor, and he has all these other countries already paying tribute to him. It's not actually different in that regard, but he claims to be different just by stating something else that is not the case. And I find that interesting because when I listened to the audiobooks of Wheel of Time, the early ones all had like the same short interview with Robert Jordan tacked onto the end, where he talked about like what his inspiration for Wheel of Time, and he always made this, yeah, I had this idea. It's like in all fantasy novels, there's always this wise wizard or whatever character coming in and telling the people, hey, I would need you to save the world and come with me on this quest. And I wondered, that's so unrealistic, right? And if people would come to like a country village and would do this, like everyone else would just like leave them alone and not go on the quest because people are smart and don't do these kind of dumb shit things. So I wanted to do something different. And then he writes Wheel of fucking Time, which starts with, the fucking Aes Sedai coming into the village getting burned down and everyone having no other option than to flee because they are hounded by, mysterious faceless creatures that can possibly even fly. And I'm like, you did the exact same fucking thing, my man. You just claim you have done something different. And that's something I find interesting in their approach, that they are incredibly, incredibly traditional in the way they set up stories. But they then sort of like, when talking about the work, they claim that they have done something different. And apparently it's working, which probably says something about how people don't pay attention much. Okay, 1 hour time difference. That's not too bad. Yeah, the time zone thing is just something I'm always confused with because I mean Europe does have time zones as well, right? Like Britain is 1 hour behind us, behind Germany, and Finland and Greece and Bulgaria. That's roughly sort of the parts of at least the European Union that are 1 hour ahead of Central Europe, I guess. And beyond that, things get wild. I mean, the Wheel of Time is more than just derivative crap. I would, as someone who has read it and who is certainly very, very critical of it. Now, I mean, I don't think it's good, but I don't think it is just derivative crap. It does try different things later on, certainly. The first book is fairly derivative, but so is like the first Memory, Sorrow, Thorn book, a Dragonbone Chair, and so is there sort of Shannara, and there's a lot of others as well. So I wouldn't call it derivative crap. I mean, it's easy to do that in like the first parts of Eye of the World because they are incredibly derivative. I mean, it's it, it it's not as bad as sort of Shannara, but it does certainly hit all the same kind of bits and pieces that you get in Lord of the Rings mostly. But it does add other things. Like there's a level of like cosmic horror that Robert Jordan is actually quite good at. I would argue he's much better at the cosmic horror parts than at the epic fantasy parts. So there is other stuff in there. It just fails in all kinds of other ways. But people love it. I would argue it's worth reading The Wheel of Time if you want to understand the history of fantasy and how we ended up where we are today. There's just, some books you need to kind of read to see to have like a full understanding of the evolution of traditional epic, whatever you want to call it, fantasy. And in that case, you need to read both Ted Williams. You need to read Wheel of Time. I don't think you need to read Sword of Truth. I mean, you can read Wizard's First Rule, but I think that would be enough because the way Terry Goodkind always behaved, the way he called it, not fantasy and all this other crap, Sword of Truth did kind of fall out of like the fantasy mainstream or fantasy, or at least favor with like fantasy readers outside of dedicated Sword of Truth fans. So I don't think it had much of an impact on the genre as a whole. Whereas Wheel of Time certainly had an impact. Memory, Sorrow, Thorn famously is one of George R. Martin's favorite epic fantasy series, and in that regard, I think it's important if you want to look at the history or the development of fantasy as a genre, it makes sense to read Wheel of Time. Beyond that, in the year 2024, you don't need to read Wheel of Time. You're not missing anything that other books haven't done much better by now, I would argue. And yeah, there's so much wrong with the series. Yeah, I agree. Wizard's First Rule sucks. It's a really bad book, and I doubt it will get better anytime soon after that. I mean, I think it gets a bit more kinky, and if the whole like whipping and leather dildo thing is something you're interested in, then I guess Sort of Truth is the kind of book that one of the few books that delivered that in like the 90s. But it's not a good book, and I think what makes Sort of Truth interesting to read is like you can just by reading Sort of Truth, you can tell that Terry Goodkind is or was not a cool person to hang around. Like the way, I mean, obviously he was like an Ayn Rand fan, and we all know that those are not necessarily, cool people. Um, Ayn Rand fans are not necessarily cool people because the kind of attitudes that are sort of inherent in that are make you uncomfortable to be around, I would argue. But you can tell just by reading the way the book is done, you can just tell that Good Kind is not very good and not very kind, to put it that way. Well, I mean, he certainly could live off his work. So, what can I say? But yeah, and that's like the thing that makes a huge difference. Like, I've read both Sword of Shannara and I've read Sword of Truth, and not Sword of Truth, like just like Wizard's First Rule. And while I would argue both are bad books, I had a better time with a Sword of Shannara, and from all I've seen of Terry Goodkind, not Terry Goodkind, Terry Brooks as a person, he seems to be like a really cool dude to hang out with. I'm someone who has, I write nonfiction about elves in his Twitter and Blue Sky profile, seems to be the kind of person who does not take himself too seriously, which I think is the proper attitude if you've written Sword of Shannara and are writing, well, Shannara books 40 years later as well. I mean, guy knows what he's doing, and I appreciate that. And Sword of Shannara is certainly not a good book, but it feels less self-important. I think that's sort of the thing that I find that really troubled me about Wizard's First Rule. It is not a good book, and it's highly derivative, but it feels incredibly self-important about the whole thing in a way that not even Lord of the Rings does feel self-important. Yes, Lord of the Rings feels sincere, but it doesn't feel self-important. I guess that's how I would describe it. And I don't know. I read Elfstones of Shannara afterwards, and it was already like a huge step up, and Shannara going its own way. So I feel like Brooks moved on into like an interesting direction, and maybe I'll read some Shannara in the future. Um, yeah, and what else can I say? I say like rereading Mistborn, I notice a lot of things that make me not very happy. Also, I feel like, at least for Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson is not good at world building. He's like, his economy makes even less sense than the economy in, say, Lord of the Rings, which already doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't have to because Lord of the Rings doesn't have like the kind of historical background where economies need to work. But it's like no one's talking about taxes or anything in Lord of the Rings, but it's like, how does the economy in Mistborn function? It doesn't. It's so that's something I've learned on my reread of Mistborn so far. Also, I've already picked up some of the ticks that make Sanderson's writing annoying to me over time. Like that he always has to have at least one character with like a stupid accent, or in his books it either use like a weird dialect accent thing where he can play around and make stupid language jokes, or use like three or four made up words from their specific language they always drop, and it's man. That's the kind of thing I would do if I would be, running a Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm either a player or a dungeon master, or the game master. I would obviously come up with like stupid voices and shit like that, but that's because I have nothing else to do, right? Or I don't have time to prepare much better, right, on the spot, because so much of it is improvising. But you're writing a book, you don't have to improvise. You can come up with other ticks than ridiculous three words that they always say. I've heard Daniel Abrahams is very much concerned with it. I'm not saying you have to, explain economy to me. That's not the point. But the way with Mistborn is that like everyone uses coins all the time for stuff, but no one ever buys anything. No one ever produces anything, and the Lord Ruler owns the entire world basically. So how is this supposed to work? Is everyone like owned by the guy? So why do they why yeah, it doesn't make sense in any way or form. And then you have like noble houses. Like, why are they noble? Is it all just because it was set in motion like that? Or I just feel it's weird because he uses modern economic terminology from time to time, but there's nothing behind it, right? It's like, I don't know, man. Either say nothing about, like, with Tolkien, for example, it makes sense, right? Like the Rohirrim, they don't trade. They probably barter if they have to and live in this like noble Viking style or early Anglo-Saxon kind of style of economy where the king is like a ring giver and people probably farm and barter most of the time, I guess, and that's that. And he doesn't have to go into it, and he doesn't use any of the vocabulary. But like Sanderson, especially with Mistborn being sort of like almost industrial, like you have like the ska somewhere between slaves and factory workers being exploited and everything. It's like, how does that work? Are they getting paid? Are they not getting paid? Who buys all that stuff? And I think that's sort of the thing. Is like you can create a fantasy world and never ever talk about economics because you don't have to unless it matters for the story. But then don't use modern vocabulary. And that's the same thing with like that may be just like a problem with Sanderson using a fairly accessible sort of language in general. You have like the same thing, right? There is in Elantris, they go to like a large party ball, whatever thing. And for whatever reason, Brandon Sanderson uses the word band for all the musicians. And I'm like, everyone wears gowns. Everyone is sort of in this medieval style, maybe early Renaissance, but mostly medieval style world. And you're talking about a band. If there's like 20, 30 people on stage, what kind of band is this? You can say orchestra, you can say minstrel. Maybe don't use minstrel if you want to sell your book in America, but you can use all these different fucking words for it. But every group of musicians is a band in this one. It's like, no one's playing guitar here. You see what I mean? That's sort of like something I find, and I think the economics problem is a similar one, because once you use economic terminology, I start to ask questions because I have assumptions that are kind of tied to that in a way. Now that's an interesting question, Yelizi. I mean, I guess the main thing is that the language needs to be, or should be, relatively simple, like a slower vocabulary. Or are you looking for something that is also accessible to younger people? I mean, those are two different questions, because you can, read something with a fairly, I mean, you can always read The Hobbit, right? The Hobbit is not very difficult in any way or form in English. That's, I think, always a solid start. And I would argue that most of the like sword and sorcery stories are relatively easy to follow, but a lot of them use like really weird, outmoded words to seem more epic. So I'm not sure about those. Good question. Which books? I mean, you can always read. I hate to say this. You can probably read Brandon Sanderson. Not that I would recommend that, but it's certainly easy language-wise. That's for sure. Hey, Kale, how you doing? Well, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, Aragorn's. I mean, that's a George R. Martin being facetious because I think he should know better. Because the world of Lord of the Rings is an epic world, right? The kind of thing that you find in epic poems and so forth. That's the inspiration. Um, there's more Beowulf and more possibly even King Arthur in there than anything else. And you don't learn about Arthur's tax policy either in any of those. And I've read a lot of old Arthurian texts at this point. It's like they don't talk about Arthur's tax policy either because it's kind of vaguely assumed that it works like people do their jobs, and when the king comes through, they pay something akin to a tithe, I guess, some stuff in physical goods, and that's that. And I mean, that's kind of what you see when you look at Minas Tirith, right? When they call when Gondor calls its allies and they come in, it's more like the Lord says like, "Hey guys, we got a scrap on our hands. Please come in," and then everyone sends as many people as they can send, and then the Lord provides food and yeah, lodging and board for everyone until the scrap is over, and then everyone takes as much plunder as they can and get home. That's sort of like the economics of Gondor and the economics of Rohan. Where stuff gets interesting is, of course, the Shire, where once again economics make no sense. I mean, the Shire doesn't make any sense. Are they paying taxes? How are they paying for stuff? I mean, obviously Bilbo is independently wealthy. We know that because he possibly owns land and has tenant farmers. So I guess he's more like a country gentry kind of style. But how does the Shire work? We don't know. I mean, that's like the thing, right? When you are in Gondor, when they are in Minas Tirith, everyone in Minas Tirith gets fed through like the army barracks because everyone is basically a soldier at that point. They just go to the commissary and get food, and so you don't have to think about money. No one pays anything outside of the Shire, where they do apparently possibly pay for beer in the Green Dragon in Bywater. I don't know. And that's like I feel like where we're talking kind of breaks down is, if you want to call it breaks down, is in the Shire, which is more like England, 19th century romanticized England in a lot of ways, where you do have modern economics in the thing that it kind of evokes. And that I think is like how fantasy often works, right? It's like you use terminology, you use words that we associate with other things, and we kind of paint in the background. So when you have someone complain about the Lord's taxes being too high, we assume then we kind of fill in our understanding of tax policies and stuff. And if you don't ever mention money, if you don't ever mention someone paying for anything, after you leave the Prancing Pony, no one ever pays anything in Lord of the Rings. It's all basically free or scavenged or whatever. But so you don't fill that in, and that's why probably very few people have noticed or thought about Aragorn's tax policies, because he doesn't have to do taxes, which makes me envy him. And that's, I think, where Sanderson does kind of fail in that he does use that modern terminology from time to time because he wants to make his book accessible, I guess. Probably also doesn't want to use the word tithe because it's too close to home, I guess. Which is, something you can totally use outside of a religious context in like a medieval style fantasy, because everyone said like tithing. That's where the word comes from, like not from like the biblical context, but in today's, especially American context, if you say tithe, you're a Mormon. And while there is a lot of Mormon influence, and I've certainly found a lot of Mormon influence in his writing already, I don't think he tries to bring it up too much, which is like one of those interesting things, because there's a lot of religion getting talked about in both Elantris and Mistborn so far, but no one is religious, really. Like Elantris, the gods are apparently dead, and in this one, there's a Lord Ruler in Mistborn, and no one prays to him. And yes, I know how Mistborn Era 1 ends, so I'm aware of where this is going. But for now, it's an interesting thing, because Ceset constantly tells people about older religions, but that's that. Um, so I don't know. It's just like weird that he feels the need to talk about religion. He understands that people are religious or need to be religious in the way that Tolkien just never mentioned any form of religion in his world at all. Um, he feels the need to put it in somewhere, but he is clearly uncomfortable of actually depicting working religion and having people be religious in the world. In the same way that you don't have like actual real religion work out in Wheel of Time, where you don't have the same. I mean, you have those whatever they're called, those light, the fascists. You have the Nazis, and apparently they worship the light. But so what? There's no structure, there's no theology in there, because the problem is, of course, usually it's like, what do you do in your fantasy world? Are the gods real or are they not real? And that kind of makes religion kind of difficult to tackle. Yeah, Joe Abercrombie, I think, is fairly easy to understand. Um, I would argue the main thing that can make reading Abercrombie difficult is that his dialogue is often very, very clipped. So he uses sometimes, not full sentences and something like that, which is, probably not too hard to get into, but maybe somewhat more getting used to if you have. But I feel like he's much closer to what you might call modern dialogue. So if you also watch modern media and stuff like that, I feel Abercrombie is also fairly accessible. That is true. Obviously, I'm very much trying to not say Drizzt, because Drizzt is language-wise obviously incredibly accessible if you know your Dungeons and Dragons terminology. But I don't want to recommend those books because they're bad. I mean, with fantasy, who else is accessible? I mean, I don't feel like, say, Robin Hobb is hard to read, because everything moves so slowly that even if you miss like a word, you don't miss much, I guess. That would be another author where I'm like, yeah, you can probably go down that route. I said, like, I think The Hobbit is easy. Lord of the Rings, not so much, because there he uses more like older style vocabulary. Some of the, some of the Fritz Leiber, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, and some of the Conan stuff is definitely also relatively accessible. I would argue that Black Company is relatively easy if you get through the first one or two paragraphs and are willing to look up some Roman terminology, military terminology from time to time. But most of Black Company has has a very terse, sort of almost Hemingway-ish style of prose, like very short sentences, very dry and terse in that regard, which I would argue makes it relatively easy to read. That's another one I think I would recommend for that. I may add that, Britain. Yeah, I mean, once again, I think it kind of depends, Elise. Like, Lord of the Rings is not concerned, for example, Lord of the Rings being in that epic mode is not concerned with daily life. It is an epic tale. Like, they're in an emergency situation. If we would, the whole story takes 1 year and no one is actually king at the time. I mean, except for Theoden, who has certainly more important things to do at the time than look at taxes and stuff. So I think it works, because if you can, once again, if you read books like Arthur, like even Le Morte d'Arthur, right, which is 16th, 15th century, and does have parts about Arthur doing Arthur stuff and also Arthur being at Camelot and sitting around and whatnot. It does not look at that. Now, if you write something where like the longer term sort of like ruling of the country take is important, then yes, it needs to involve economics, which is why say the Malazan books do certainly involve that kind of stuff. I would argue that, Game of Thrones, I think like Song of Ice and Fire does maybe have some of that, but not very much. As I said, I have not read them, but I've heard that the Dagger and the Coin series by Daniel Abrams does have a lot of economic stuff in there. In that regard, but as I said, like, I have not read those, so I wouldn't know. And then again, not that many fantasy books start out with characters being kings. So you don't have that many actually concerned with that. With religion, I agree. Religion should be much more built into most fantasy world. And I think that's like something that a lot of modern fantasy authors have trouble with, because religion for a lot of fantasy writers is not as deeply intertwined with everyday life in all these unique different ways that like medieval religion is, right? It's not like you believe in God and that's that, but it's like you do all these small things, all these small folk traditions, different gestures, small superstitions. All of that stuff is part of your religion, of your faith, and it's just like the lens through which you see the world. And that's something that I think it can be hard to get by a lot of modern authors, because most of us are, even if we are religious and believe in God, we are not that kind of religion, because we live in places that are moderately secularized, most of us. So our day-to-day life is not as suffused by that. Now, it could be different for someone like Brandon Sanderson being a faithful Mormon. I don't know how faithful he really is, how believing he really is. I wouldn't know. Um, it could be different for someone like what's his name, Stephen Lawhead. But Lawhead, being incredibly preachy in the way he does it, also fails, because he doesn't write books that are about medieval stuff. He writes books where you as the reader need to come out and go like, yeah, this Christ guy seems like the good guy. I was like, yeah, man. That's not how that works. No one needed to be preachy about God in medieval Europe. That stuff was over. I mean, maybe like out there in the Baltics or whatever, where Germans were still slaughtering the natives to take over their country. Yes, but yeah, I think the problem is that you need to take religion seriously as a praxis, which is not the same thing as being religious yourself. And I feel a lot of people have difficulties with that, because it's either they are atheists and think religion is bad, and then that can make it difficult to take it, seriously, or they are religious, and then it can be difficult to write about something that is nominally close to your own religion, but still feels super alien to the way you practice your religion nowadays. So I think a lot of authors struggle with that, because it gets very close to personal beliefs and personal attitudes that are sometimes hard to put into words and hard to overcome. In the same way that writing sex scenes and writing humor is such a personal thing, can be very difficult. I feel a lot of people struggle with something like religion as well. I don't know. It's certainly something I will have to tackle in my writing at the moment, because what with it being sort of historical and being in early 16th century Central Europe, vaguely set, yeah, religion's kind of a bit of a big deal, right? We, we're in the let's nail stuff, let's nail posters to church doors era, and religion was certainly a big deal at the time. And it's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is to find ways of including those elements and putting them in. But it's certainly not something that's going to come easy to me, and we'll find out if I succeed at that. I'm not sure about Adam Smith there. He might actually be Britain. I don't know. Have you read The Wealth of Nations? It has interesting things to say that a lot of people praising the invisible hand of the market do not necessarily still understand, because Smith was much more concerned about ideas like monopolies and how they are bad, and stuff like that, than you might think. I mean, Smith is interesting in that regard. Marx, not. I mean, Marx is certainly, some would probably enjoy parts of the Hobbit Shire economy, if you can call it an economy, but it's totally underdeveloped. That short story sounds like a fun thing. I might actually read that and see if it works. I mean, I will have to read Daniel Abraham at some point, I know, but it's another one that I've always pushed down the road, because people that whose taste I have sort of trouble with love both KJ Parker and Daniel Abraham, and I'm not sure. And that kind of puts me off, is what I'm saying. And the same thing is that I mean, KJ Parker is also kind of difficult to get to, because not that much of his stuff is available in audio. Like obviously the whatever it's called, the Siege trilogy is available in audio, and the one from last year with the vaguely Latin sounding name dude that I've already forgotten is available. But most of his other stuff and short story collections are not available in audio, so I have not gone down that route. But I've heard good things about KJ Parker, also from other people that I do trust more. So maybe I'll get him at some point. Hey, Kat, how you doing? Yeah, that's the one, the Corex one. We should probably get starting with the sprinting thing, but let me recommend one Tolkien story that, if you haven't read it yet, is one of, I think, J.R. Tolkien's best works, because it's one where he has fun, where he can sort of stretch his medievalist muscles in a bit of a way, making fun of medieval manuscripts and shit like that as well. And that is, of course, Farmer Giles of Ham, which is one of the funniest bits of writing that Tolkien has ever done. I really, really, really enjoy that story every single time. It also has a very cool dog, and a very cool dragon, and a lot of other really fun things. So if you have never read Farmer Giles of Ham, go read that. It's also fairly short. It's it's a really, really funny story. Ori just summarizing most of fantasy, or most of fantasy written by men, I would argue. It's yeah. I don't know. I'm still like, before we leave, like before we go for the first sprint in like a minute or two. One of the things I found interesting with Mistborn is how blatantly you know, Sanderson does rip stuff from other sources and just mashes it together and kind of gets away with it. I mean, basically, it's Mistborn era, like book one, the Final Empire is basically, what if Cinderella in Menzoberranzan, but without yeah, what if Mistborn in Menzoberranzan plus some vaguely ongoing heist story, and it's I don't know. People seem to like it, so who am I to say? Well, in that case, thanks for jumping in, Kat, and good luck at university. So yeah, let's try to do some productivity here and get shit rolling. And I'll be back at 25-ish, I guess. And I'm back. How did y'all do? I hope you managed to be productive and all of that. Yes, Ori, it could also be My Fair Lady, but I mean, I think there's elements of both in there, but yeah, the ash makes it more Cinderella, I guess. um, but yeah. Also, it doesn't necessarily have the My Fair Lady aspect to it. In that Vin is like incredibly competent at being noble from like the beginning because she's incredibly competent at everything, except of course doing stuff on her own because she needs a male-led group to organize shit around it. But I guess that's just how things are in this world. Yeah, Alan does like KJ Parker. I'm aware of that, or Britain. I don't know if that would make it better or worse as a recommendation to me, though. I did, in fact, do some of the admin stuff that I wanted to do, reply to comments and shit, and go through news and read emails and delete emails and stuff. Read a longer part on the Robert Evans Shatter Zone Substack on the school shooting from Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, right. And how the right falsely claimed that the shooter was transgender, and how all of that sort of like narrative usually spreads incredibly quickly by fairly established by now sort of media channels, alternative media channels, to claim that every school shooter is apparently trans, which they're not. Which is depressing, but what you gonna do? And that's all the other stuff, some Kickstarter emails, some other stuff, and YouTube comments. I forgot to add what's it called? The original guy who did the person who did the join gratitude tag that Britain you tagged me in. They commented on my version of the tag, and I forgot to add their original video or link their channel in my video description, which is something I still need to fix now that I'm aware of it, because me being bad at this kind of stuff, I completely missed that option. So that's probably something I'll have to do at the beginning of the next sprints before I start laying down words. And we'll see where that goes. Maybe I'll also, oh yeah, right, I need to also message some people about stuff. And yes, like as I said, like the KJ Parker stuff might be good, certainly unique and everything, but it's the usual problem that I have is like, if people tell me that it's brilliant and I have to read it, I'm incredibly I'm immediately wary about it and don't want to do it, which I know is a bad habit, but what you gonna do? I mean, the other thing with KJ Parker is like that he writes so many like short stories and novellas and stuff, and I always feel bad using like an entire Audible credit on like a 3-hour audiobook. That feels wrong. So I don't know. But that's that's like the general like accessibility thing. That the fact that we still do like region lock and shit like that in audiobooks is so fucking annoying. So yeah, I'm gonna finish Mistborn today, and maybe that'll give me enough sort of like updated knowledge to do a video on Metal from Heaven, because it does hit a lot of similar like topics, but does so in, I would argue, a much more nuanced way. Also, obviously, in a more, you know, more political way, obviously. And of course, like in a, far more queer way. Yeah, I know they're collected in print. I know that, but they don't do audio collections of those, or at least they don't do them for people like me. And so I'm left with either going for like the Siege trilogy or the Savus Corax trilogy, or nothing at all. So maybe I'll go for like the Siege one or the other one and see how I like it at some point. I mean, I still need to figure out what books I'm going to read next year, and like what new releases I'm going to read next year. Everything else, I'll just take whatever I feel like. But with like which ones I want to read when they come out. And I think like the first one's going to be the Neri Okura for the Death of the Author. That's the one I may already have pre-ordered, and it comes out fairly early, like in January already. Just need to remember when. Because yeah, I did in fact start writing down which books I want to read. Oh yeah, 14th. That's like super early. 14th of January, Neri Okura for Death of the Author. And then I have nothing until Amal Al-Motar's The River Has Roots in March. But maybe I'll figure out something else, that I realize that something else comes out that I really want to read. Who knows? Yeah, no, I have a lot of issues with Subterranean, but I know people like them, and I know people. I mean, they make good looking books, but the whole problem that I have with a lot of these boutique presses is that they basically sell collector's items that are mostly basic. I mean, I think they sell their stuff as ebooks as well, but at least some of that stuff comes out in ebook as well. But the books are usually just like sold for people to keep somewhere as an investment and then sell to some desperate fan later on for like multiple times the original price. And I personally think we should not turn even books into objects of speculation. That's not how art should work. And I know it's already working with with other parts of the art market, but taking fantasy books into that same realm feels fucked up. I have not looked at that one yet, Ori. Might be interesting. Yeah, the Joe Abercrombie one I have obviously on the list, and I obviously have the new the Second Witness book, No Life Forsaken. That's sometime in October, and there's another Chuck Tingle one coming in August, I think, and there's a new Silvia Moreno Garcia one that looks interesting. I'll definitely find books. Don't get me wrong. With the Joe Abercrombie one, I'm obviously interested and I'm going to read it, of course, because he is one of those big names. But yeah, we'll see. There was another one that I found interesting, but I have forgotten which one it was. And multiple people have now told me that I should read some Adam Roberts. So maybe next year will be the year when I pick up one of the really weird Adam Roberts books. I still need to figure out which one, because from what I can tell, they're all super different from each other. So I'll find something, I guess. Maybe I'll just like throw a coin or whatever. So maybe I'll dip my toes into the Lake of Darkness or something. We'll find out. See, that's what I mean. Like, I mean, that's kind of the problem, right? It's like if you have these texts available in like an affordable version somewhere, I don't mind if you also do like some good-looking books for people who want to have them on their shelves. Like, I don't need that, but whatever. But if suddenly stuff is exclusive to those that can only, that can to only those who can afford to pay like $50 at least for like a 100-page book or whatever, then yeah, fuck you. I'll have to look at what that one, which that one is. I mean, as I said, I looked over it. Someone said that the thing itself might be one I might be interested in because of it, being philosophical and all of that. I know last year's was more like a crime noir kind of thing. Maybe I'll also check if one of them is maybe just like free on Audible or something, and I'll use that one as an intro. Who knows? Same way I still plan to, read those William S. Burroughs books as long as they're free on Audible Plus catalog until the end of the month. So I should probably make the rest of the month somewhat psychedelic with a lot of William S. Burroughs. And yes, I mean, if I want to read the next Silvia Moreno Garcia, it might also be time to check out some of her back catalog, because I feel, I did really, really enjoy The Seventh Whale of Salome. So maybe I'll try Silver Nitrate next. Who knows? And is it called The Bewitchment, The Witching, something like that? Coming out next year. Sounds like it could be fun. It's apparently dark academia, witchcraft in Massachusetts kind of thing. So could be fun. All right, shall we try the second sprint, guys? So I can maybe be back at like 25 again, and then I have like a couple of minutes to pack my stuff and get to the gym. I think that sounds like a good plan. So let's do that. Hello, everybody. I am back. And goodbye, Elise. Okay, I didn't know about that specific audiobook bundle. This was an incredibly frustrating sprint because I was trying to figure something out, and it turns out that Amazon Belgium sucks, and I'm trying to figure out what to do there. Yeah, seems they don't want to take my card for whatever reason, and I'm trying to figure out how to circumvent that specific payment option, but I have to use Amazon Belgium. And it took them a while to tell me that something didn't work. It's frustrating, and I spent like the last 40 minutes doing that. So we'll have to keep on keeping on, I assume. I don't know what to do about this. And since the internet is getting less and less helpful these days, I guess I'll have to struggle some more. I don't know. I wish, enshittification wasn't as far gone down as it is, but that's where we are. It's highly frustrating. So I didn't get any writing done. I just got madder and madder and madder at the internet, which is bad. But if I'm lucky, it will mean that, I can take all of that energy now to the gym and at least get something done, and then hopefully figure out the solution once I'm somewhat calmer. It's, as I said, it's really frustrating. I mean, maybe. Who knows? It's all really fucked up. But yeah, here we are. I hope you were somewhat more successful. So yeah, the internet being the internet, it kind of sucks. But maybe I'll get some writing done this afternoon, and hopefully I'll finally get, through the next big parts of the Mormonism video. I just really, really, really want to get this out before the end of the year. But, what can you do? Life is all struggle, apparently. And I know this sounds so stupid, right? It sounds so fucked up and stupid because it's compared to like how bad the world is at the moment. This should not be a problem. This should not be something that annoys me this much. But Bob, what can you do? Yeah, I don't know. It's all highly frustrating. And I assume that's partly just the ADHD kind of thing, right? Where I assume it's just like partly the ADHD thing that like clicking on buttons and having and everything taking longer than it should makes stuff just even more frustrating. But here we are, me being frustrated. But what can we do? Some days are just worse than others, I guess. Anyway, I should probably run to catch a bus and at least get something physical done today. So thanks everybody for you know thanks for hanging out. I really appreciate that, even when the sprints are not as good as they could be, and I am less productive than I want to be, and have less interesting things to say. I'll try to be better tomorrow. I hope it'll work. I certainly hope so. And yeah, see you with a video either today or tomorrow for Metal from Heaven, and hopefully, stuff.